All right, welcome to this week's episode of our show, True Data Ops. I'm your host, Kent Graziano, the Data Warrior. Each episode, we try to bring you a podcast covering all things data ops with the people that are making data ops what it is today. If you've not yet done so, be sure to look up and subscribe to the DataOps.live YouTube channel, where you'll find all the recordings of our past episodes. It's now summer here in the Northern Hemisphere, so if you missed any episodes, you might want to catch up while you're relaxing somewhere at the beach or on a road trip this summer for some nice, easy listening with the True Data Ops podcast. Now, today we have a special episode with one of my buddies here, Guy Adams, who's the CTO and co-founder of DataOps.live, and he's the co-author of the book Data Ops for Dummies. Welcome back to the show, Guy.
Thanks, Kent. Great to be here.
So, in case there's people out there listening to our show, picking this up new that don't know you, could you give us just a quick background on yourself and your career in data management?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've actually only been in the data world for about 5 years, which is as long as I've been using Snowflake. Actually, before that, my background was probably 20 years in the software engineering world. So I've been through the agile DevOps CI/CD journey many times. And when I came to the data world, that was really the start. That was the spark for us to look at data ops as a concept, and ultimately with you build the True Data Ops philosophy, because we saw so much analogy between what we're doing in the software world generally and the challenges of the data world, but in particular relevant to today's session, the analogies between data products, which is really where a lot of the data world is moving, and the software products that we've been building for many years.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks. So last week was Snowflake Summit. So before we get started diving deep on data products, just wanted to check with you to see how Summit was this year and how your sessions went.
Oh, Summit was crazy. Every year it's bigger, every year it's better, every year there are more and more announcements. The Snowflake push into application development is enormous. The Snowflake push into the new generative AI is enormous. But it's really relevant for what we're talking about, because ultimately all of these new capabilities all need to be wrapped up into something. They all need to be packaged in a way that can be managed, controlled, delivered to the rest of the world. And the pretty much the de facto way of doing that is becoming data products. So although there was a wide range of announcements and new functionality in lots of different areas, actually data products is the common theme across all of them. It's the common way to wrap those together. I did a session specifically on data products, actually focusing just on the Snowpark piece. So particularly Snowpark for Python, which is kind of how you can bring your Python application code to the data and run it inside the Snowflake infrastructure. But all of that was about, okay, I've written my code. I know I need to bring it to the data, but how do I package it up? How do I version it? How do I lifecycle it? How do I deploy it? If you were interested, I think the recording for that will go live in the next week or two, and I'm sure links will be on our LinkedIn page. So follow us there, and you'll be able to see that if you didn't make it to Summit.
Right, and if you can't find it that way, everybody, you can go to snowflake.com/summit. The agenda is there, and if you I think you have to register in order to be able to see it. If you attended Summit but missed Guy's session, then you should be able to see the recording there. They said it was going to be a week or so, and everything will be up. So make sure you definitely want to check that out. All right, so what you just described, and especially this move into native apps and app development and all of that, it's starting to sound more and more like the software development world you and I both came out of, right? It's like everything old is new again, right? So even more apropos now our conversation about data products. And there's all this talk about data products. We hear about it everywhere, but a lot of people don't understand it. So we need to start out with what the heck is a data product anyway. So you just tell us about that.
Yeah, so I guess where most people have initially come across data products, many will know, Zhamak Dehghani came out with a concept of data mesh a number of years ago, and data products are actually data as a product is one of the 4 foundational pillars of data mesh. But in many ways, one of the reasons it's become so popular is it's actually independent of the other 3. There's lots of organizations who are approaching data products and seeing data products as a really valuable way of delivering in this other organization that maybe aren't ready or don't want to go down the other 3 pillars. So it's first of all, it's important to understand that data products exist as a concept outside of data mesh, and they're extremely valuable inside of data mesh architecture, but they're just as valuable outside. And one of the things it's worth disambiguating is actually what Zach talks about is data as a product. And I got the question probably 15 times last week at Summit. So what is the difference?
There's a difference.
Yeah. Well, what is the difference? And actually, a lot of people say, are these competing philosophies? Are these, actually, really all they are is different sides of the same coin. Data as a product is a way of thinking. I think about my data as a product. The data product itself is what happens from that. So when a team says we are going to approach data as a product, we're going to adopt this as a philosophy, what they end up building is data product. So one is the thought process, one is essentially the outcome or the output of that, but they're not competing, they're not different, they're not distinct. Just one is a thought process and one is an actual tangible thing that you go ahead and build and deploy. So you can regard the two terms as broadly interchangeable. But the way I kind of explain data products to people is, depends whether they come from the software world or the data world. If they come from the software world, I would say a data product is very much in the data world what a microservice was in the software world. In the software world, we'll develop lines of code, libraries, tests, user interfaces. We'll deploy microservices. We'll publish and version APIs. And those are all extremely non-controversial, well-understood things. In the data world, for a data product, we'll develop ELT, ETL workloads. We will develop transformations. We'll develop table definitions, view definitions, native apps. We will deploy data products, but the data product becomes the base unit we deploy. In the same way, you don't deploy a line of code or a library or a test. You deploy the microservice, and it's got lots of those other things in it. The same thing. We've got lots and lots of component parts inside a data product, but the data product becomes the base unit of management. It becomes that first-class citizen that we think about everything else in the context of it's part of a data product. And then when we publish and version, we're not publishing and versioning APIs per se, we're publishing and versioning data product interfaces, which might be user interfaces, they might be REST interfaces, they might simply be SQL interfaces on top of standard tables and views. We don't have to move away from many of the paradigms that are extremely well understood in the data world.
So I know a lot of people tend to think of, and I know I first was thinking of this as, data marts. We used to build in the data warehousing world. We built a data mart, and that's what we delivered. And so that the data mart itself could be a data product, right?
It certainly, in terms of what it outputs, I think the biggest difference is for people that have come from that data world, it's less about what you're building and more about how you're building it. So yes, in your data mart, you would have had some ingestions, some transformations, and ultimately you'd have produced a set of tables and views and materialized views. And you may, in a data product, produce exactly the same things. The real difference is it's all of the process around it. So in a data mart project, you'd have had a beginning, a middle, an end. You'd have had a project manager rather than owner. You'd have had a scope that you defined, and then you'd have resisted changes to that scope. And ultimately, it would have taken typically months to get live. In a data product, we think about things in terms of roadmaps and life cycles, but it's not a start, middle, and end. It's a continual, ongoing journey. We have a data product owner rather than a product manager. One of the biggest differences, and just in terms of thinking, is in the data product world, we encourage and embrace changes. We're not resisting changes. We don't regard scope creep as a bad thing. We say changes are good because changes mean that we are moving closer towards what the business needs.
Didn't we say that in Agile?
Yeah, we did.
That was an Agile principle. Yeah,
it was very much
which came out of the software development world.
Exactly, and so data products are really just a manifestation of taking those Agile principles from the software world. If we apply those to data development, what do we end up with? We end up with data products, which, again, as you said, may look a bit like data marts. They may have tables and views, and you can have all sorts of different data architectures in there, but the principles and the processes around which we build that are quite different. And ultimately, the value of this is about business value. It's about getting, predominantly it's about getting changes live faster. A data mart would typically take months to build and launch. A data product, we're talking about making changes in hours and days. So that's the real kind of fundamental business.
Rapid iteration, also
very
from Agile.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So like with our software, we always say never use version 1.0 of any piece of software, and there's 1.0, 1.0.1, and then 1.2 and 1.5.6.7. And so we're talking about doing the same thing with data now.
Yep.
Right. As
exactly.
a data product. We're going to think in the same, applying that kind of thinking.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
versioning, since you mentioned it, Kevin, versioning is one of those things that, in the software world, it's been around since the dawn of time. Nobody remembers a piece of software that didn't have a version on it. And yet, I could count on one hand in the last 5 years, the number of, we call them data products, but the number of data marts, the number of data artifacts, whatever you want to call them, that have been actually effectively
versioned.
And I think it's one of the biggest differences, and it's one of the biggest things that are holding people in the data world back. because once you build this data product, or whatever you call it, whatever you historically called it, as soon as you give it to people, whether you commit to it or not, there's an expectation of backwards compatibility. There's an expectation that you're not just going to change things because other people have built for something from the simplest dashboard right down to their own custom applications on top of it. So you've got this commitment, whether it's explicit or implicit, of backwards compatibility. And the problem is, at some point, for very good business reasons, very good technical reasons, you'll need to change that. And you've now got two sort of conflicting things. On one hand, I've got to keep it the same. On the other hand, I've got to change it. And the only effective way, and the way the software world has squared the circle for decades, has been, right, I'll leave version 1 alone. I will now create version 2. Version 2 will have all my new stuff in. I will give my users 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, whatever's appropriate to migrate from version 1 to version 2. And then version 2 becomes the right version. And at some point in 18 months' time, I might start to build version 3. But that concept of versioning data products or versioning data marts or whatever just historically hasn't existed in the data world. And it's one of the biggest limitations for data teams.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that makes quite a bit of sense. So one of the criticisms of data mesh and data product concepts is that they're pretty abstract to most folks. So can you help us a little bit get a little more concrete and define, really define a data product in particular? What's a good data product look like?
Many people will have come across FAIR principles, and FAIR, the FAIR principles are good. They're another good kind of high level abstract, but I don't think they go far enough, and they're not pragmatic enough to really define, what good looks like. So we've defined 10 characteristics, 10 attributes of a data product that ultimately, if you are scoring well in these 10 areas, you've got a really, really good data product. That doesn't mean you have to do all this at once. And I stress that. We do a lot of work with people on what maturity looks like. But 7 of those 10 characteristics are about the data product itself. So the first one is accessible. You've got to produce the output of your data product has got to be in a way that's useful, accessible, and understandable to your target consumers. If you build something that people want to put a BI report on top of, but you save a bunch of XML files into a file system, you've done all of the work. You've probably produced the right data, but you've produced it in a way that's just not accessible to your target audience. So accessible is a really important principle. Interoperable and composable. This is a much more advanced one, because what we're saying is, as I build these what I would call foundational data products. Foundational data product is where I've ingested some data, I'm doing some amount of transformation, and I'm publishing the results. But it's based on reading new data in. But where the most advanced organizations are getting the best value is saying, right, I've got a set of foundational data products, but now other people in my organization are building new data products with existing foundational data products as their inputs. So it's that Lego building block. I'm taking, and the obvious example, the easiest one to define, is a customer 360 view. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but I need to take sales data and customer data and marketing data. So those would all be foundational data products which are read in from external systems. And then I build a new data product called Customer 360, which reads in from those other data products. But that only works well if you're building your data products with thoughts about interoperability, like a customer ID. Is the customer ID standardized across all these things? And composable. Have I built these things in a way that these things are designed to plug together? Most people still think about what they're producing as, can I give it to an analyst or a BI analyst? They're not thinking about how does the output of what I'm producing work as the input for someone else building a more sophisticated, a more advanced, a more aggregate data product. So
so from a data mesh perspective, those foundational data products would potentially be coming from what they call in data mesh domain teams, different domains, right?
Absolutely.
But again, they have to be thinking about who's the consumer.
Yep. I mean, I'll give you another great example. And even these composite data products still often belong in the domain team. So, one of our good customers is a company called OneWeb in the satellite communication space, and they produce data products for different parts of the system. A data product for the satellite terminal, data product for the spacecraft itself, a data product for the Earth station where the data lands, and those data products represent their own pieces. But if you want an end-to-end view of what service my customer's experiencing, I need to assemble all of those data products together to get an end-to-end view of what the customer experiences. So they have another different domain that's not responsible for any of those pieces. They're responsible for the end-to-end, the customer journey, if you like. And so they don't produce any data of their own right. What they do is take data products that are produced by the other departments, the technical departments, and they aggregate them together to produce these kind of user journey end-to-end data products, which are some of the most valuable for the business.
Makes sense.
So I think the third principle we've talked about a little bit is backwards compatibility, and that goes with multi-versioning. If you are as soon as you've advertised a data product as to a set of consumers, they're expecting backwards compatibility, whether you offer it or not. And really, in the data product world, you should be offering it. It's part of the contract that you offer to people. But it's no good offering that if you're not testing it. It can't be something that you just assume. I'll know if it's broken if my users tell me. Just doesn't work in this.
Right, a dashboard breaks somewhere. Right.
Yeah, you have to be proactively, not even monitoring. You have to be preventing. You need to get to the point where when a user or an engineer is making a change, the system needs to say, by the way, if you make that change, you're going to break backwards compatibility. I'm going to prevent you from doing it, or at the very least, I'm going to force you to jump through some hoops to override this if you do want to break it. And most of the time, what will happen is you say, oh yeah, I didn't think about that. I can actually solve this problem another way, which doesn't break backwards compatibility. I'm not going to rename this column. I'm going to create a new column for my new purpose and then leave the old column alone, as a simple example. So backwards compatibility and automated backwards compatibility testing is hugely important. And then that feeds into what we were talking about before, which is multi-versioning. If you do have a really strong, compelling reason to break backwards compatibility, build a second version, run the two versions in parallel for a period of time, and then end of life the old one.
Right.
Trustworthy. This is a fairly basic one, but it covers more than just things like people think about correctness and data quality, but it's also things like completeness. It's guarantees about timeliness. It's the complete gamut of information that a business user needs to say, yes, I'm going to make potentially $1 million business decisions based on the data that you're providing me in this data product. One that a lot of people struggle with, particularly in the data world, is exclusive. A data product, and particularly the data product interface, the bit that you are exposing to your consumers, must be the exclusive and the only way to access the data. There must be no backdoors. So if you think about this in the software world, you've got a Postgres database and some code and then a REST API. If you've got some data in the database and someone wants access to it, but it's not in your API, would you ever dream of giving your downstream consumers just username and
access to the database? Don't.
It would be unthinkable. You'd say, right, if it would go to the product owner would say it's a valid request, lots of people want it, would go into the roadmap, and 3 days later, because they're doing very agile development, it would appear in the API and everybody's happy. The problem in the data world is that those behind the scenes, those black box systems, may still be tables and views like our presentation is. If the data product interface is a set of tables and views that users have permissions on, roles on, it's much easier to say, oh, can you give my role access to that raw data table? And it's a one-line command. They're already in the database anyway. What's really the harm in it? But actually, the fact that it's technically easy to do in no way, it mitigates any of the problems about giving people backdoor access. Because what actually happened now is something that should be a black box that you can change at will. Now, all of a sudden, whatever they said to you when they wanted access, they're now going to expect that not to change.
Now you have dependencies.
Exactly. And as soon as you bypass your published interface and you give someone access behind the scenes, effectively, you just created another part of the published interface, and they're going to expect backwards compatibility, and that's really going to hamper you downstream. So the interface of a data product must be the exclusive and only way to get access to that data.
Well, there's really some governance concerns there as well, right? Security and governance concerns, because now somebody, even though that person might have had access to that data, they could now put it in their own data product and make it visible to somebody else who really shouldn't have access to that data.
Exactly. Everything is based around the fact that we have an interface. That interface has a set of guarantees, and some of those guarantees, you say, are governance, guarantees. Like, we test that we're not bleeding PII information, for example, through our product, through our published interface. We're probably not running the same test against the stuff behind the scenes because we don't need to, because everything needs to go through that. So you're right. There's a lot of governance and security risk of doing it that way as well. I think the sixth one from product perspective is self-contained. And this is one that I would say more people struggle with this more than anything else, is how big or small should my data product be? Do I have, I'll take my example of your company and satellite communications. Do I have one data product that's everything in my entire network? Do I have a data product just for this one router here, or this one switch, or this one part that's basically off? How big or small should my data product be? And the problem is there's no easy way to answer that question. The way I define it more is you've got to think about it from your consumer's perspective. There are lots of obvious problems in your data product being too big. If you end up with your data product being everything, you're back to kind of the worlds of just kind of data.
Well, that's a data warehouse.
Yeah, exactly. The microservices were created because they wanted to take these big monolithic things and break them into much smaller, manageable components. We're trying to do the same with data. So we don't want to leave it too big, but if we make it too small, then people, in order to get any value out of my data product or this data product, if they also have to use that one and that one, then it's probably too small. So it's a slightly sort of glib statement by saying, make your data products as small as possible, but no smaller.
No smaller. Yes.
And it comes from the perspective of, can a user think about my users, think about my expected use cases? Can they achieve those expected use cases just using my data product on its own? If they can, you've probably got it about right. And the other thing to bear in mind here, and this is where people from a data modeling perspective sometimes kind of get a bit shaky, is that may mean that certain pieces of information are made available through multiple data products. Let's say the linkage between a product ID and a product name. In a fully normalized world, we might say, right, that information should exist once and only once. But that information might be exposed through 3 or 4 different data products because they're all showing different aspects of that.
Right.
That's okay. There needs to be a single source of truth in the back. In those hidden black boxes, there needs to be a single source of truth. But that source of truth can be presented, can be manifested, can be materialized multiple different times, multiple different ways through different data products. So we're not breaching the concept of single source of truth, but single source of truth doesn't mean single source interface. And that's a really key distinction that people struggle with.
And that's where, kind of the data ops and true data ops aspect of this sort of does come in of, having you have to have the lineage, right? You got to be able to do the dependency analysis. You got to be able to have a clear audit trail so that that it all traces back to the same, that even if it's exposed in 3 different data products, it's the same answer in all 3 data products for that particular piece of data, right?
Single source of truth, and then multiple, for want of a better phrase, multiple views on it, where those views are optimized for my consumers and my use cases.
Okay.
Then I think just to finish up, like that, if we look at then the remaining 3, which are more part of the process behind it, we've already mentioned Agile a number of times, but it is so fundamental to this. It is really not possible, or certainly not meaningful, to try and build a data product without an Agile process. These things are so inextricably linked, and that means that you've got to be storing everything as code. That means you've got to be doing versioning. That means you've got to have CI/CD process. So, you've got to have automated testing built in. In the same way that building a microservice, in the software world without doing Agile CI/CD is it technically possible? Yes. Would anybody in their right mind consider doing it? No. It's not a meaningful thing to do. The second one is discoverable, and this should be one, but it's amazing the number of organizations that focus on building these amazing data products and don't think too much about, well, how are my consumers going to find the right one? Right. What does discoverability look like? Because a data product that people can't find is worse than no data product. If you didn't build a data product, okay, well, no one can use it, but at least you didn't spend any time and money on it. A data product that people can't find, you spent the time and money. So you've got all the downside, but no one's using it, so you've got none of the upside. So an undiscoverable data product is worse than no data product at all in many ways. So discoverability is key, and it doesn't have to be super fancy. This is about the maturity journey. In some cases, if I'm a company with 2 data products, a SharePoint page or a wiki page or a spreadsheet is good enough. We're not saying that you have to have a heavyweight solution for every one of these problems, but every one of these problems does need to be covered in a way that's appropriate for where you are on that journey, how many data products you've got, what your maturity looks like. Right. And then the final one is product managed, and we've kind of covered a lot of the terms anyway. But the way that you think about this, the way you have a backlog, the way that you think about releases, the fact that you've got a product owner, even the way you interface with your stakeholders, and your downstream consumers, these are well solved problems. These are things in the data world that we don't need to solve again. We've got enough unique problems to ourselves. The fact that we're dealing with, petabytes of data that we want to, move around in real time and we've got plenty of our own unique data challenges without kind of biting off things that have already been well solved. So, data product management is 99% the same as software product management. And if you want to know more, just go and read about software product management and, search and replace the word software for data or microservice for data product, and you won't go too far wrong. So I think, if you look across those 10, 7 kind of defining and attributes of the data product itself, and then those final 3, which are about how I build, how I deploy, what the ecosystem looks like around those data products. And I think if you look at things in those 10 different ways, you won't go too far wrong. And certainly we've got companies now who can look at all 10 of those and say, yes, we are at we rate ourselves as a 7 or above in each of those areas, and they're the ones who are getting just enormous value at massive scale. Tens or hundreds of data products, built in weeks, not months, being released, hundreds and hundreds of times per month. That's the nirvana state that everybody is aiming for.
Right. Yeah. Well, I can see that there's certainly a lot of potential value in looking at the things this way and taking this approach. But in your big picture world, what do you think is the biggest value to organizations about thinking about data products like this?
I think the value has got to be about back to that point we talked about with composability. I just think the concept of having all of the data from the rest of my organization as these foundational data products, which are all designed to be reused and all designed to be consumed by other data products. It's very rare that inside an organization, the answer to a really important business question just comes from, I'm just going to ingest this one source of data, do some work on it, and then my answer is there. Yes, there are a few, but the biggest answers and the biggest insights and the biggest value to the business comes from looking at things across that data. And right now, is it possible? Of course, we've done 5, 6, 7 years of breaking down silos and things like that. But breaking down the silos historically has just meant kind of putting everything into one place. What it hasn't dealt with is, like, once we've got it into one place, then how do we logically break it up so that we can manage these things, deploy these things, version these things independently? So I think that composability, that thinking about your data products as it's a foundational data product where I'm bringing data into the system, or is it something that is reading one or more other data products, doing something useful, and republishing the result to be used by potentially other data products, and so on and so on. I think once you start thinking about the world that way, what you find is even very, very complicated use cases, even questions that historically were kind of, almost unthinkable to answer, actually can be answered very, very quickly. And they can be answered very, very cheaply with very little effort, because what you're doing is saying, I'm going to stand on top of what most of the rest of the world has done. And again, if you want to go back to a software analogy, and Kent, forgive me for saying you probably remember some of this. Back in the day, we used to write most of our code ourselves. If you think about it now, I take Streamlit as a perfect example. I can put 25 lines of code down and get a fully interactive user application. That would have taken me 2,000 lines of code in the past. Why? Right. Because I'm saying other people have done most of the work for me, and it doesn't really matter whether it's a software library or another data product. What I'm saying is, have a piece of work done once and then have everybody else benefit from that. And it doesn't matter whether it's software libraries or data products. The principle is the same. Let other people do most of the work, add a little bit of your own stuff, and produce new, distinct, unique value. And then make that available to other people to build on top of. You can be the person that's done the work so that they can build on top of. Get that right, and you are a truly data-driven organization.
And I think to a certain extent, people have started to learn that in the last couple of years with the Snowflake marketplace and the ability to purchase data sets. And they're already, those are data products, right? They're discoverable. You have the metadata, and you can immediately incorporate that into an analysis you're doing. That's what we're talking about, right? Is having a refined, unique set of data available through an interface that's easily discoverable, that you can, in a couple of clicks, access and now tie it into what you are doing and produce another, as you called it, a composable data product, right? Yep. So, a lot of organizations are already kind of down the road of working on or planning their data products journey. But this looks like potentially a lot of work, with the 10 components, and you think about the 7 pillars of true data ops and all of that. So what do you say to organizations that are thinking like, this might be a little too much, and maybe we'll take a look at this in the future? So,
I think it's about that. It's a great question, and it's one that's coming up a lot, and it's one that we're working on as part of the Data Products for Dummies book is define this maturity journey, because ultimately what we're talking about is the end state. What we're talking about is where you want to get to, and those 10 principles are where you want to be. A lot of those you need to give almost no thought to day one. Do I care about interoperability and composability when I have 2 data products? Absolutely not. Forget about it. Not relevant to you. Come back to it in 6 months' time. And some of these are ones where just a tiny amount of thought on day one, and then nothing for 12 months will buy you huge benefit. I'll give you an example. How many people in the early days of building a software application, when they built their REST interface, said, I wish I'd have just put V1 in the URL, because now I need to build a V2. I don't even need to think about what V2 might look like or how I'd build it. Just the one thought process says, at the future, I might need a new version of this. So I'm just going to put V1 somewhere in what I'm building so that in the future, there can be something else. So a lot of these are just think about it, and we're defining this maturity model. It says on day one, this is what you need to think about. And in some cases, it's don't think about it at all. Some cases, it's give it 60 seconds of thought and then don't worry about it. In some cases, like, for example, I would say things like product management and agile, you need to have those really on day one, because they affect everything you do. They make everything from that so much more efficient. Not having those on day one is really, kind of counterproductive. So there is definitely a maturity journey. But say I would say we've had customers who've gone from a standing start to building a very respectable data product in 6 weeks. So this doesn't have to be really, really scary. Just with a little bit of help and a little bit of thought, you can start that journey, get the value, really get the relevant value really early on, and then iterate as you go. And remember that agile process, one of the reasons that we all follow agile so closely is because it stops me having to think about too many things up front. It stops me having to try and forecast and crystal ball into the future. Like take a security model. I've seen customers spend 6 months just trying to design the security model for a data product, without saying, well, look, what do I need that day one? Well, no, in 2 years' time, people might need this. Well, why worry about that today? Build the security model you need for the first 3 months, get it out there, because chances are that what you're forecasting won't happen anyway. It'll be wrong. So just, spend a day thinking about it, get it out there, and then based on what you learn in the first 3 months, then build the second iteration and the third iteration, the fourth iteration over a period of years. So, that principle of agile allows us to, put something very lean out on day one and then iterate through it over time.
Right. Well, there's just so much to learn here, Guy. Where can our listeners find out more about this and about this approach?
So there's some information on the DataOps.live website, but we're also in the process, as I mentioned, of building and writing the Data Product for Dummies book. So keep an eye out on the website. That's going to go live in a few months' time. There'll be a free download from the website. And if you come to our events, I think we're doing a launch event at Big Data London. So if you're in that part of the world, come to Big Data London and you'll be able to get signed copies as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being on the show again, Guy. You've given me, as always, a lot to think about, and there's more and more to learn all the time. You certainly aren't going to be, people aren't going to be bored in this space, but unfortunately, we're out of time for the show today. So we're going to have to cut it off there. Thanks again, Guy, for being here, and thanks everybody for listening in today. Don't forget to like and share the recording so all your friends know about the True Data Ops podcast and can pick up all this. There's a QR code on the screen now to get you to the YouTube playlist to make that a little easier. Wonderful new technology that we can do these things live online. But we're going to take a little summer break now. As I said, it's summer in the Northern Hemisphere, and spend some time with family and friends and relaxing for a little bit. We will be back again on September 6th. So keep your eyes open on LinkedIn for the announcements and to see who a guest will be for kicking off the fall season. So again, have a great summer, and see you in the fall. This is Kent Graziano, the Data Warrior, signing off for now. Cheers.
Bye-bye.